Hello you guys, how you doing? Okay, I hope this video finds you guys well as we are in the grips of a COVID pandemic, and I'm about to do some gardening, or at least transplant some seedlings for eventual transplanting in my garden. Let's see here. Alright, it's not getting done. Let's see here. It's a little tough. Alrighty. Okay, so I hope you guys are staying safe, doing your civic duty of what we call the social distancing. So explain to me, or at least tell me, what is your impression of everything that's going on? In my view, what has happened has been a giant clusterfuck, if you'll pardon the French. I think our government has pretty much mishandled everything from the beginning, and they continue to mishandle everything. Just to give you a little background about myself, I have a Bachelor of Arts in biology with a concentration in genetics, and I pursued 9 additional credit hours at the graduate level in molecular biology, and gave up on the schooling thing until maybe 10 years later. Went back to school and got a Master of Science in environmental health, which is kissing cousins to public health. The only difference is, or the main difference is, that environmental health involves the impact of the environment on people, and also the impact, if you decide to go with the industrial hygiene portion of it, the impact on the workplace on people's health. We had to take epidemiology, so I have a pretty good grasp of epidemiological concepts. And the biggest issue that I have is that this was something that was known to be coming from China as the primary source. I think at the onset, the president did a good thing in limiting access from China to the United States, but it's just like in horse race, when you get out the gate good and then you falter for the rest of the race, and I think that that's where we are now, just faltering for the rest of the race. One thing that gave me a great deal of concern at the very beginning was an article that I had read about a couple coming back from South Korea. When they left South Korea, they were screened at the airport, temperature taken, questionnaires, all kinds of stuff, required to wear masks, were interviewed, all that stuff. They said that when they came to the United States, they fully expected to see the same thing. You figured that, I believe, was in late January or early February, last week of January, first week of February. But when they came back, there was nothing. No screening, no questionnaires, no masks, no temperature readings, nothing. They just walked through the terminal as if it were nobody's business. That to me was a giant red flag that we were not doing what we should have been doing. Personally, I do not fly. Personally, I do not go overseas for anything. So my knowledge of what actually transpires in the airport terminals beyond where just somebody who's not flying can go these days is just gleaned from what people have told me. But I found that to be very disquieting to find out that we were doing nothing for people coming back into the country. I think the second thing was there were cases where people had requested, or doctors had requested, for patients to be tested, and for whatever reason the CDC did not test them. If that is in fact the case, then you can see how this is starting to snowball, where you have persons coming from overseas not being screened, and persons feeling ill with the symptoms of the disease as we understood it at the time, from information gathered from the Chinese, which is a whole nother matter all into itself. Nothing was done. They weren't screened, they weren't tested, and they were just allowed out into, as we call it, the populace at large. So from the very onset, it seems that we were kind of behind the 8-ball with this thing. Flash forward 2 months. Okay, so now we're in the middle of March, or early March. The Mardi Gras has already taken place. Probably shouldn't have. There were mounting cases in the United States. You had governors and mayors of major metropolitan areas saying everything is fine, don't worry about it, just go about your business. In fact, I think the mayor of New York even had some recommendations for shows that people could go to. That was the first week of March. Here in my city of Philadelphia, a couple weeks later, you had the mayor pretty much pushing to have the St. Patrick's Day parade. Mind you, the Irish by that point had already canceled their parade, and of course that's in Ireland. You think St. Patrick, Ireland, they're almost synonymous, right? And they had already canceled their parade, yet here in the United States we're pushing for it. Our main concern was revenue, was money. And I think you'll find that to be a common theme throughout this entire episode. It all comes down to money. For whatever reasons, Americans are afraid to let go of money. They do not see the bigger picture around money. I like to use ancient proverbs, adages, things that you learn in nursery school, which is a stitch in time saves 9. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Essentially, if you take care of things on the front side, you're eventually going to wind up spending a lot less on the back side. Like I said, they teach you that in nursery school with Aesop's fables and such. Yet, our so-called leaders, our politicians, are so blinded by whatever budgetary constraints that they have that they cannot foresee the wider impact if they allow these things to get out of hand. In my opinion, if a nationwide action had been taken let's say in early February, we would be out of this by now, or at least coming out of it. We wouldn't be still debating whether or not we should close our uh, transit systems in these major metropolitan area. Like recently in Philadelphia, they really just cut back on a lot of the bus scheduling and train scheduling. And in New York, you have Mayor or Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio wondering if they should cut down the subways there in New York. In my opinion, that should have been done 3, 4 weeks ago. That should have been a no-brainer. But they were too busy worrying about the front side of the economic equation versus the back side of it. So, yeah. Yep. So there you have it. Yep, that is my opinion on the matter. Okay. Also, there's the public's response to it. You had the Florida beachers, the what we call them, the spring breakers, basically saying they don't care. Um, because I guess at that point they thought that perhaps they were not subject to the same level of impact from the disease based upon information that we were getting overseas, that it was affecting mostly the elderly, older folks with underlying health conditions. You have to bear in mind that between, let's say, the Generation X, the baby boomers, and the so-called silent generation, those born, I guess, in the late 20s, early 30s, too young to actually participate in World War II. They're in their 80s and 90s now. So we have a very large population that is potentially impacted by this. I count myself among them. I'm a Generation X or early baby or late baby boomer, born 1964. So I'm kind of like in that tweener generation. And of course, I have just like a lot of people of my age, 55 and older. You start to develop health issues. Hypertension, diabetes, which I do not have. Hypertension, yes. Diabetes, no. I currently have been a little more susceptible to respiratory ailments. So, yeah, I'm probably in a high risk category. So when you have young folks like that, brazenly just nonchalant, not caring about the older generations, not caring about themselves even, that too is concerning. And I guess ironically, American youth are not in very good shape either, and that could potentially be one of the reasons why there's been more impact on the younger generations, the so-called millennials, and what they call Generation Z or whatever they're called, than in other countries, because we're in such poor health. We have very poor diets. Obesity is running amok. I think some recent studies have suggested that diabetes and obesity, I should say, is a risk factor as well. So you have these big obese kids who are now feeling the impact of, I guess, some misinformation. And lo, there has been a hell of a lot of misinformation, disinformation around everything. You have a lot of armchair virologists who've never studied anything biologic since perhaps high school biology. Um, you have these people who will read an article and not understand the larger implications of the article. They perhaps don't know that, okay, one study does not a trend show. Um, so if you're basing everything on one study that perhaps isn't even peer reviewed yet, you're basing you're basing things on misinformation. A lot of people are saying, well, I don't know if you want to call them conspiracy theorists, but there are a lot of conspiracy theorists. A lot of people that think that we're losing our civil rights and constitutional rights behind this disease. I would say that there's the likelihood that some of that is going on as well. But the social distancing, the seclusion of people from outdoor activities, quarantining, those are age old, I mean millennia old techniques that are used to prevent the spread. So when they ask you to stay in your house for a certain period of time, 2, 3 weeks, a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, yes, that's a long time. People call it a lockdown. I don't know what's going on in every region of the United States, but I would hardly refer to what we're doing as a lockdown. I mean, it's like you can leave, most people can leave the house where they want, they can go out, they can walk, they can go to the stores, they can go shopping for their essential goods. Now, you can't do everything that you used to do, but the basics of what you need to do, you can do. And that's the most important aspect. The basics of what you need to do, you can do in order to survive, in order to make it through this. I don't have to go to a sporting event. As long as I can go to a filling station, fill up my car if I need to. As long as I can go to a grocery store to pick up food. As long as I can go to a drugstore to pick up my medications or food. I mean, go to the post office, if you need to mail your letters, your bills. That's the essentials of life. Anything else is good to have, but you can do without it, especially for a period of time. It'll be there when when things are ready. So this has just been a, like I said, someone who has my background, understands epidemiology and, the action of viruses. I did a paper in grad school on the 1918 flu pandemic. Very interesting, very interested in pandemics and the like. Considered even getting a doctorate in public health once upon a time. So seeing everything that's going on has been very frustrating to me. Yes, there's certain things I can't do that I would like to do, but like I said, I can do the basics. I can do the most important things, the things that keep me alive. There's a movement over the last couple of days to hold rallies to try to force the state and local governments to open up a lockdown, which aren't really lockdowns in most jurisdictions that I'm to understand, where you can do the things that are basic for your necessities of life. So if we're not ready for that yet. That's pie in the sky. That's wishful thinking. We're just not ready for it. So yes, it's been extremely frustrating to watch and witness this. The lack of social responsibility of so many of our fellow citizens. It's just outstanding. I mean, it is just outstanding. It's just, and when I say outstanding, I'm just saying not in a good way, outstanding. It's really somewhat sad that for a brief period of time we can't pull together, try to pull in one direction, and hastened into this thing instead of having it strung out for weeks, months at a time. It's just sad. In my estimation, if people had gotten off their high horse, done what was first asked, not mandated by the government. And you got to understand one thing about the government too. I know a lot of people don't trust the government. I don't trust the government per se. But you have to have your finger on the pulse of what's really going on and see that, okay, we see what direction they're going in, and you just use history as a guide that this has been done before. This is not the first time that people have been asked to, shelter in place. And those preppers among us should appreciate the fact that what this so-called lockdown is nothing more than an extended shelter in place. It's a common practice. Preppers should be ready for this. The people out there complaining about their jobs, a lot of them are in conservative states right now. You would think that perhaps they would have a prepper mentality, that they would have prepared themselves for this. Back in 2012, I did a series of videos on setting up emergency funds. And also I did another video where someone had, I believe it was called, and I'll post it in this screed if I decide to post this. I know it's getting a little long-winded. But I talk about developing emergency funds for bad times. In my opinion, in those videos, I stated that I think that job loss is probably the most likely emergency that most people are going to encounter. This time we happen to be getting a twofer. Not only do you have the pandemic, you also have the job loss that comes with it. Now, I'm not sure what people were doing with their resources during the longest stretch of financial gain that the country has ever experienced, stock market wise at least. But if they had been since the last recession, you get your job back and you start working and you maintain your employment for the past 12 years, mind you, 12 years. So let's just say that people started working again 10 years ago in 2010. They've had 10 years to accumulate money to build an emergency fund to weather such an occurrence as this. The one thing financial planners have always said, that you should have 3 to 6 at a minimum, 12 months optimally of funds available for an emergency fund for times such as these. Had that been the case, then perhaps people wouldn't be clamoring to go back to work so soon and would be willing more so to ride this out if they had exercised financial responsibility. I don't think enough people learned from the last financial crisis in 2008. That should have been a wake-up call. Once you get yourself back on your feet, first thing you do is set up an emergency fund. Get some money set aside so that when the economy crashes again, not if, when the economy crashes again, you'll be better able to weather it. Apparently not enough people did that. And now they're anxious to get back to work so that they can support themselves. People need to go back to the ancient texts, the religious texts, and reacquaint themselves with, like I said, some of the old proverbs, some of the old stories from the Bible about 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. We had more than 7 years of famine. We had, or of plenty. We had 12 years at least of plenty. I think people should have taken the time to set aside for themselves money so that when this time came, be it just your regular financial crisis or some other natural disaster, or in this case, the pandemic, that they would be better financially situated to get through it without having to go back to work, without having to risk their lives or their health, the health of their neighbor, their family, and their friends by rushing back to work. And shame on some of the employers who are deemed essential personnel or deemed essential businesses for not doing a better job of protecting their employees. It took weeks, and this is my wheelhouse, industrial hygiene and worker safety. This is my wheelhouse. This is where I do most of my good work. Is that they did not have engineering controls in place to protect the workers. For weeks, they did not have breath shields or sneeze shields or whatever at the cash register. All you had was the cashier on one side and the potentially affected public on the other, or vice versa. Perhaps the cashier was infected and carrying the disease, infecting everybody that's going to her register or his register. So a lot that could have been done wasn't done. From the actions of the average citizen to the highest office in the land and every single step between. This has been a study in how not to handle a pandemic. Remember when the so-called public health officials told you, no, don't wear a mask, you don't need masks, save them for the health professionals. Save it for the people in the hospitals doing work with the actual infected patients. I remember seeing images, videos from Iran where they had the Iranian women sewing cloth face masks. I remember Americans laughing at them, saying, oh, those things don't do you any good, why are you doing this? And that was a couple weeks before our so-called health professionals did a 180 and then said, you know what, perhaps you need to wear a mask. I was like, wait a second, a month ago you were telling us not to wear them. Now you're telling us to wear them? So we've had 4 or 5 weeks where we could have been cutting down on the potential spread of the contagion, and you were telling us not to wear them? So I understand a lot of the frustration with people and the health organizations. You know, the World Health Organization, for instance, and the CDC. All of them blew it. Spectacularly, I might add. So it's been extremely frustrating just sitting back and watching all of this transpire. I'm essential personnel, so I'm going to work, trying to protect myself. Try not to, you know, catch something, bring it home, wipe out my family potentially. But in any case, I guess I've probably ranted long enough. These seedlings really need to get transplanted. Um, they're about 4 or 5 weeks along, and we're getting past the frost stage here. So I shouldn't have to worry about frost in the next couple weeks, and so I'll get these bad boys outside. They're a little twisty, but they still look like they have a good leaf set on them. So let me know how things are going with you guys. I'll probably just wind up posting this entire screed. It's going on for a good 20 minutes now. Probably more than 20 minutes. I interrupted the video. But yeah, I think I'll just post this entire thing, and you know, if you want to listen to me rant, that's fine. If you don't want to, that's fine as well. But I'm always willing to listen to differing opinions on certain things. This being no different. So let me know what you think about this pandemic and the missteps that have occurred, in my opinion, at each phase of it. From people continuing to get on cruise ships and then getting stuck out at sea, to us not letting the cruise ships dock and letting people just sit on the cruise ships for, you know, days and weeks potentially, as the air is just being recirculated and more people are infected by it. Yes, I mean, this was, oh yeah, one more thing. The people flooding in from Europe after we closed down travel from EU. Now, was that a clusterfuck or not? I mean, I just remember seeing video of people just lined up, no masks on, no sign of social distancing, just flooding back from heavily infested or, infected Italy and Europe. No plan to move them through efficiently without actually just gathering hundreds, if not thousands, of people together in one place, potentially infecting them all, or at least a significant portion of them, and then dispersing them to their own communities. If there's any wonder why things turn into a disaster in New York, you can look no further than that. We were just not prepared for anything along these lines. From our healthcare system to our supply chains. Don't get me started on China, production in China. Granted, Trump wanted to do something about it, but he didn't do something about it quickly enough, I guess. He's only been in there for 3 years. I think he had the right idea to get more manufacturing back to the United States. And so a lot of the crap that we need to protect ourselves with, it's made in China. Can't get it here. They can't make it here. They can't make it fast enough here. And what they do have in China, they're holding it hostage. So much for globalization, right? So next time you go to Walmart and buy your cheap Chinese stuff, just think about this video. As a matter of fact, I bought some cheap Chinese stuff myself, a nice Predator 3500 inverter generator. Yep. Bought it right before this mess really got kicked off, and I think we're going to have to shy away from Chinese-made products in the future, because we really need to get manufacturing back on American shores again. It was good to save money. It's always good to save money, but you can see the shortcomings of that particular globalist ideology, where so many others abroad who are not necessarily friendly nations to you can control your destiny and your public health. We really need to reevaluate that seriously. I'm talking about on a personal level, not just a political level, but a personal level. I think we need to go back to buying American if you can find it. And we need to punish those companies that make things overseas and leave the United States for overseas so they can increase their bottom line at pretty much the expense of all of us, which is what it really comes down to. So if you can't get a face mask, that's because they're tied up in China. 3M is making them in China. And so there you have it. So instead of your cloth mask, you could have had a nice N95 mask, but they're hung up in China. When China was shut down, when they weren't making anything, there you go. Production dries up, supply chain dries up, and you can't get what you need for yourself. Not in time to save yourself, anyway. Some of the stuff is coming over now, when it's not being held hostage. But the damage is done.